Hello, so we're doing another chapter today, chapter 5. There we go. Okay, when Sam finally turned back to the table to finish his meal, Brett dropped into the sink the biggest, greenest ball of spit he could cough up. He stirred it into the dishwasher with the plastic scrubbing brush, then, risking getting caught a second time, added another one. Gross, just like to say that. That is disgusting. He was mad. He got the longest lecture of his life when Sam busted him hiding behind the garage after bailing out of history. He'd skipped music and computer studies too. As punishment, Sam grounded him. No free time, no dinner, no arguments. If you want to break the rules, you have to face the consequences, he said. And to set an example to the other inmates, Sam ordered Brett to wash up every plate, bowl, fork, knife, spoon, cup and oven tray used for cooking that night's meal alone, and he wasn't allowed to go and sulk in his room until everyone was scrubbed clean and dried. When Brett heard this, he went ballistic. He and Sam had a major fight in front of everybody. Brett said he wasn't going to wash up any stupid plates, and Sam said he was. Brett said he wasn't, and Sam said he was, or else he'd call the cops that night and make them come back. Brett said he wouldn't, and Sam said he would. They stood there, staring each other off until Brett gave in. Sam had fought a million fights before, and winning an argument against him was impossible. He meant what he said about calling the cops, and that's what scared Brett the most. He didn't want to share a cell with some pervert in real jail, so he ended up doing the stupid chores. But he wasn't beaten, no way. He was going to sabotage this job by slagging in the water and accidentally breaking as many plates as possible. Only a handful of inmates remained in the mess hall, along with Sam, Mary, and some of the teaching staff. Most guys had finished their meal and were enjoying their last half hour of spare time or grabbing a shower before bed. One interesting thing Brett had noticed, though, while scrubbing the oven trays was that Josh sat with the staff some of the time and with the inmates the rest. He didn't go to class either, but got private tuition. He wondered how the jock had scored that deal, probably through a lot of scrawling. Seeing him there, laughing and joking, he knew Josh had to be Sam's pet. He was too polite and friendly to be an inmate. The cops had probably arrested him for jaywalking. Brett hated him. Not that it mattered anymore. When lights out was called that night and everyone was asleep, Brett was leaving this hole once and for all. Escaping, right? He couldn't stay here any longer because he wasn't welcome. The inmates hated him and Sam hated him, and he'd never felt more alone. There was no chickening out. He made up his mind. His bag was packed and his escape plan simple. Run and don't stop. He could be in Sydney in a couple of days. Escaping unnoticed wasn't going to be a problem. The only staff members still on the property were those sitting in the mess hall at the moment, and they'd be heading home soon. That only left Sam and Mary, and they'd been up all day. Brett would be 100 k's from this place come the next morning. Easy. A kid walked into the kitchen and dropped his plate next to the sink. Brett didn't look up. The times he had, the look from the other inmates had been less than friendly. Sam caught you, huh? Brett looked up. It was Frog. Yeah, out behind the garage. Frog glanced at the man. He must have been really mad. I've never seen Sam lose his temper like that. Brett winced a smile. Somehow that victory didn't sound as comforting as he thought it might be. You hungry? Definitely. The only things Brett had eaten all night were a violet crumble and the gum he'd nicked. I can try and get you some fruit. For later, I mean. Matthew Hill's got an orange and a banana on his tray. He'll give it to me for nothing. Robbie, a deep voice boomed from the mess hall. Frog shrank. It was Sam. Give Brett your tray and then go down to your dorm. Please, there's still half an hour before lights out, and you could use the time to finish your maths homework. Frog nodded glumly, then left, dragging his feet behind him. Sam and Brett watched the kid leave, then looked at each other. Brett snarled. Sam turned away. Then Sam finally let him go, not without another lecture. Brett still had 10 minutes before lights out. He grabbed his smokes and headed for the toilets. He couldn't care less anymore if Sam caught him. He was leaving. He locked the cubicle door behind him and took a seat. He lit the cigarette, then checked out how many he had left. Only 15. He'd have to save them until he could buy some more. Lighting up, he went over his plan one more time. He'd wait until everyone was asleep and then grab some food from the kitchen and break out of here. Simple, really. There was one problem, though. Where was he heading? At first he assumed Sydney, but the more he thought about it, the more hesitant he became. The first the cops would look for him would be home. Holing up with his mates was out of the question too, because being the great friends that they were, they'd dob him in the minute he fell asleep. Normally he'd stay with Rebecca, but she was no help to him. She was shacked up with some cowboy a million miles away, so he'd have to give Sydney a miss and lie low in the country until all the trouble went away. That was a problem too. He didn't know the local area too well. Sure, he'd passed through plenty of small country towns on his way to Mungandai in the back of the paddy wagon, but he was barely conscious enough in the heat to see them, let alone remember their names. One town he did know, however, was Moree. Josh had mentioned it earlier. It was less than 2 hours' drive from Mungandai, maybe 3 or 4 days by foot. If he could make it that far, he'd be set. He could hitchhike a ride south, north, east or west, wherever he wanted to go. That's if he didn't get caught. He suspected that once he left the farm, there'd be a manhunt. The cops would regard him as an escaped felon. His face would be shown on the 6 o'clock news nationwide, making people choke on their steak and veggie dinners. Running away would make him a wanted fugitive. Yeah, he liked the sound of that. The toilet door swung open and startled Brett, nearly choked on his cigarette. The stub hit the floor and bursts of orange cinders bounced away, then stopped. Frantically, he scooped it up and flicked it into the dunny bowl. He just knew Sam would be checking up on him. Should win this year, the first voice answered. They're due. Sure, the second voice said. We'll see at the end of the season. With a thin sigh, Brett relaxed. For the first time ever, he was glad to hear the voice of Josh. Still not wanting to give himself away, though, he stayed hidden. He sat back down and leaned towards the bathroom's entrance. He wanted to hear what Josh and his friends were talking about, and whether it involved him. Their shoes squeaked against the white tiles as they walked towards the urinal. The friend dropped his guts, and Josh punched him one for finding it funny. What's that smell? Josh sniffed. This morning's baked beans. No, not that. It smells like cigarette smoke. Darren was in here earlier. It was probably him. Or that new kid Josh spat. Who, Dalton? Yeah, him. The one they brought back at lunchtime, the troublemaker. I don't like him, especially after what happened between you two today. Nobody does. Rick thinks Dalton's been through his stuff. He got back from Moree and found $10 missing. And Dalton and you were the only ones here. Right, and I caught him in my room, he said. He was looking for a tissue. As if, the friend said. The urinal flushed and Josh and the friend moved over to the sink to wash their hands. Brett stayed put, stuck his legs up through his arms so as it wouldn't be seen. That was interesting, so nobody liked him. It was a fact. Even more reason to leave. He's not going to be here much longer anyway, Josh added. He's got an attitude problem and Sam hates anyone with attitude. Did you hear him tonight? Him and Sam yelling at each other? Yeah, Josh said. Sam was really riled. I've been here 3 years and I've only seen him that mad once before. Sam this, Sam that. They were treating the guy like a king. Then again, Brett would too if he was Sam's pet. And by the sounds of it, Josh had been his pet for some time. I've been here 3 years and I've only seen him that mad once. Why had this guy been here so long? The normal stay was 3 months. If he'd served his time and was here on his own free will, as he said earlier in the day, why was he still sitting around? Lights out echoed down the corridor and was answered by a tap being turned on. The friend flicked water into Josh's face and after a quick rumble said to his mate, Come on, we better get out of here. In a minute, Josh replied, I think I've got a zit. Don't pop it. What would you do for a brain? The friend laughed and slammed the door behind him, fast enough to avoid being hit by the door behind him. Fast enough to avoid being hit by a bar of soap. The bathroom settled into silence again except for the final groaning of pipes and swishing of the urinal. Josh was still squeezing the blackhead on his chin when he looked up and saw Brett's reflection in the mirror. Slowly, very slowly, the stable hand stretched to his full height. His eyes rabbited towards the door long before his legs. Brett reached it first and blocked it with his arm. Careful with your face, he said. Might end up bloody. Josh backed into the metal seat behind him. He wanted to run, but there was only one exit. Look, he said, I don't want any trouble. Too late because you've got it. Lights out, came the second call. I've got to go, Josh said, opening the door. No, you don't, Brett said, slamming it back shut. We ain't finished yet. He shoved Josh against the sink and Josh bounced on the metal and then slowly stood up, fighting the pain. His eyes said he wasn't going to give in, but Brett would regret what he'd just done. I've got an attitude problem, do I? It was a joke, okay? Josh said, rubbing his arm. It didn't sound like one. Then you should listen more carefully. The first smart remark, excellent. There was a good chance of a fight. Just Josh and him, no spectators. Think you're a big shot, don't you? It's better than being all talk, Josh spat back. All talk, am I? I don't think so. Then prove it. They were the words Brett wanted to hear. He threw the first punch and hit Josh on the chin, following it with a second, but the stable hand ducked and retaliated with a jab to Brett's gut, hard and fast. Brett staggered back and then lashed out with another 2 quick punches of his own. They connected and Josh banged into the wall. Brett threw another, but this time Josh defended himself. He dodged the first and then the second punch and hit back with a double whammy. The air from Brett's lungs burst like a balloon as one fist crunched into his centre and the other onto his jaw. Shocked, he smacked his head first into the door of a cubicle. Pain filled his mouth where he'd bitten his tongue, and he didn't have the energy left to stand. Come on, tough guy, Josh yelled into Brett's face. You want to fight? Now fight. Dazed, Brett forgot the pain and lunged clumsily at Josh. He had to win. He tackled Josh and they tumbled onto the tiles. He laid into him with a left and then a right and then a left again, but Josh was stronger. He pushed Brett off him and machine-gunned him with what seemed like 100 punches. Next thing Brett remembered was the door slamming open and someone yelling, "What's going on here?" Then what seemed like a million hands were punching, grabbing, pushing at him at the same time. He realised he was standing again and that someone was holding on to him. He tried to break free, but his arms were pinned against his chest. At first he thought it was the friend of coming to Josh's rescue, but then he felt 2 breasts shoving into his back. Mary, stop it! And Sam, Josh, I said stop it! Brett's vision cleared enough to see what was happening. Josh kicked and strained to make Sam let go of him, but the man was holding him fast. The stable hand was cursing and saying let go. He wanted another shot at Brett, and Sam said no. What's going on? He demanded, singling Brett out. Don't look at me, Josh. Josh snarled at Brett. Nothing. Somehow I don't believe you. Now tell me what's going on. Josh squirmed in Sam's grip as Brett smiled a dopey, half-beaten grin. The kid still wanted to fight him. Maybe one day soon. Josh, stop it. Sam shook the rest of the resistance out of him, then let him go. Josh pulled his shirt down and glared at Brett before Sam pointed at him and said, You, go to your room. I'll talk to you in a minute. Next time, huh? Brett smiled at Josh as Josh left. And you, Sam growled, turning on him, get that grin off your face. I know you started this. Me? I didn't do anything. Don't lie to me. You picked a fight with Josh, and he got the better of you. That's obvious. What isn't is why the fight started in the first place. But Brett wasn't going to tell them anything. He just stood there with a cocky grin on his face. Brett, why did you start the fight? Tell him, Mary urged. When he still didn't answer, you either tell me, Sam threatened, or I'll call the authorities. And you know what that means, don't you? You spend the rest of your 3 months in real juvenile detention centre. Got it? Grinning, Brett spat. See if I care.